Hello, my name is Jeremy Halk, and I'd like to thank you for making the choice to join us here at the Greenboro Church Online. When I was a kid, the stories that Jesus told were always my favorite part of the Bible. Sheep, mustard seeds, a guy banging on a friend's door at midnight. Those stories were easy to remember, easy to retell, and easy to really feel good about. But somewhere along the way, I actually started understanding the words that Jesus was using, and well, those stories stopped giving me peace and started giving me a bit of anxiety, especially the one we're looking at today. For years, the parable of the talents felt like getting called into a performance review with God. He's the demanding CEO, tapping his foot, frowning at a spreadsheet, ready to downsize the moment that I underperform. I would come and read this parable and think, great, this is just one of the many different ways that I can fail God. I had a friend tell me one time that parables are supposed to work like a rock in your shoe. They're not there to make you comfortable, they're there to irritate you until you finally stop walking long enough so that you can sit down, untie the laces of your assumptions, and actually look at what's going on in there. When I finally did that with this story, I realized my anxiety wasn't coming from the parable at all. It was coming from the way that I was reading the parable through the wrong lens. So today, I want us to put the story back in its original moment before 2,000 years of stained glass and flannel graph has softened the edges. I don't think Jesus told the story so that we could smile and nod and move on. He told it to confront something in us. And if you let it do what it's supposed to do, it will do exactly for you what it did for me. It'll take a story that used to scare you and turn it into one of the most loving and freeing things that Jesus ever said. Now, we're not going to just parachute in the middle of the story and expect to understand it. That's like walking into a movie 45 minutes late and trying to figure out who all the characters are. So before we look at a single verse, we got to figure out where we are. We're in the last week of Jesus' life. He's just walked out of the temple for the final time. And while he was there, he told the disciples that the massive stones that they were admiring in the temple, there's going to come a day that there's not going to be one left standing on top of the other. Understandably, that got their attention. They pull him aside privately and they ask him two questions. First, when is all of this going to happen? And second, what's going to be the sign of your coming at the end of the age? In Matthew 24 and 25, we discover Jesus' answer. And we discover that he doesn't give them a timeline. He tells them a series of stories, each of them wrestling with the same underlying question. Jesus knows in a matter of days he's going to be hanging on a cross, and he needs to prepare his followers for the long season that follows without his physical presence. So every story in this section is really asking some version of the exact same question. When the master is gone and nobody's checking up on you every 5 minutes, what kind of life will you actually live? With that in mind, let's start the story and read it together. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one, he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The first thing that you need to know, and it changes everything about how you hear the story, is that when Jesus says talent, he's not talking about your singing voice or your knack for fixing things or your gift for making people laugh or your ability to run a spreadsheet. A talent was actually a weight, and it was a massive sum of money, usually silver. Most scholars estimate that 1 talent was worth about 20 years of an average day labor's wage. So, in order to make that real, let's do a little bit of math. If you make $50,000 a year, 1 talent is roughly $1 million. So, the first servant who gets 5 talents, we'll call it $5 million or 100 years of wages. The second servant's going to get 2 talents or $2 million, roughly 40 years of wages. And the third servant, the one that we call lazy, he actually gets 1 talent or $1,000,000. Now, Jesus isn't just talking about pocket change here. This is life-changing money. I think the only way that we could possibly understand what Jesus is talking about is to imagine that on a Tuesday afternoon, you get called into your boss's office and they say, I'm going to be leaving the country for a while. I'm not sure when I'm coming back. So here's 20 years of your salary in cash. You don't get any instructions. You don't get a performance metric, just money, trust, and way too many zeros. That's what the original audience would have heard. This master isn't just generous, he's actually reckless by any normal business standards. Who hands the keys to a multi-million-dollar operation to a staff and then just disappears without a plan? I think that recklessness is the point, and we haven't even gotten to the detail that would have really made their jaws drop. You see, these three men aren't employees, they're bond servants, they're slaves. In the plainest sense of the word, they belong to the house. There's no clocking out, no excuse, well, that's not in my job description. No quietly updating a resume in case something better comes along. Everything that they have, everything that they are, all of that belongs to the house they serve. And this detail matters. The master divides the money, 5, 2, and 1, each according to his ability. This isn't random. This isn't unfair. This is a master who knew his servants well enough to know exactly which each one could handle. He doesn't just pull the numbers out of a hat. He distributes thoughtfully based on real personal knowledge of each person standing in front of him. There wasn't a single person in the story that got a wrong amount. Nobody was set up to fail. Everybody got exactly what they could handle from somebody who actually knew them. And I think that's worth remembering the next time you look at your life and think, well, God gave me too little and gave them way too much. Two of the servants immediately get to work. The man who had received the 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with the 2 talents gained 2 more. Notice that, at once. No pause, no forming a risk assessment committee, no 5-year strategic plan before taking their first step. At once. And it helps me to understand that putting money to work actually meant in that economy. There's no FDIC, no insurance policies, no diversified portfolio to soften the blow. When you doubled something or somebody else's money, that meant you exposed it to real risk. Bandits on a trade route, a ship going down at sea, a bad harvest, a business partner who turns out to be a liar. These 2 servants aren't playing it safe. They're imitating the master's own wild trust. They looked at what they had been given and they decided the only sane thing for us to do is to put it in motion, willing to risk failure for the sake of the one who trusted them. And when the master comes back, look at how he responds to both servants, because the wording is not an accident. He says, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." The guy with 5 talents brought back 10. The guy with 2 brought back 4. Different totals, but identical praise. Not well done, you made more money than the other guy. The exact same praise is spoken over both of them. Because the master is not measuring the financial number on a balance sheet. He's measuring faithfulness. He's responding to whether each one did something with what they'd been given. Not praising the person whose something was bigger, but praising their faithfulness. And the invitation is come and share your master's happiness. Not enter into your next assignment. Not here's a bigger to-do list since you've proven yourself. Come to the party. The reward for faithfulness in the story is not more burden. It's an invitation to be brought close, to share with what the master has, to belong in the house on a deeper level than you have before. Now, hold on to that because we're going to need it in a minute, because we haven't talked about the third servant. And honestly, if we're being fully honest with each other, I think we have more in common with that third servant than we'd like to admit. Then the man who had received 1 talent came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. That's the whole story right there. He doesn't bury the talent because he was lazy. He buries it because he's afraid. And his fear is rooted in this specific belief about who his master was. He believed that the master was harsh, the kind of man who sets people up to fail so he could catch them failing. So the servant does the practical thing, the legally responsible thing. Under first century Jewish law, burying valuables in the ground was considered one of the safest, most defensible things you could do with somebody else's property. If you went out and buried it correctly, you were legally released from any liability if it was ever stolen or lost. By the standards of the day, burying that talent isn't reckless, it's savvy, low risk, cover yourself kind of actions. And that's important because it means when the original crowd heard the story, they wouldn't have rolled their eyes. They would have nodded along. Yeah, I get it. He's playing it safe. He's coloring inside the lines. He's doing everything legally correct. They were probably expecting the master to come back and say, well, I understand why you were cautious. Thank you for giving me back all of my belongings intact. Instead, his master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed? Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I return, I would have received it back with interest. The master uses the servant's own accusation against him. If you really believe that I was this ruthless, why on earth did you not at least put it in the bank? Bearing it's not safety, it's wickedness. And it earned him being thrown into the outer darkness. Here's what is genuinely heartbreaking about this exchange. The master doesn't argue with the servant's fear, he just exposes it. He's essentially saying, if you really believed what you just claimed to believe, you would have done something. You would have done anything, but you didn't. And that tells me this wasn't really anything about the master. It was about protecting the servant's self. And I think that's the whole hinge of the story. What you believe about God determines what you do with what God has given you. If you believe that God is harsh, waiting to catch you fail, handing out gifts as a trap instead of trust, eventually you're going to bury everything. You're going to play it safe with your whole life. Not because you're lazy by nature, but because you allow fear to make the recommendation, don't risk it. Don't put forth the effort. Don't try. But if you believe the one who entrusted you something is generous, that he delights in your faithfulness more than your flawless performance, that his invitation is to come into joy, not a courtroom, then you take the risk. You go to the marketplace, you put it to work, not because you're fearless, but because you trust the character of the one that you're serving. The third servant's tragedy isn't that he was given less, it's that he trusted and believed less. He believed this lie about his master, and that lie cost him everything he'd been given. I want us to pause here because I think a lot of us have heard this parable our whole lives and walked away with the wrong takeaway. We've absorbed this idea that we're being told to work harder, produce more, or God's going to be disappointed in us. That's a performance treadmill. That's not the gospel. Look again at what the master actually praises. He doesn't praise achievement. He praises faithfulness. The servant with the 2 talents was praised as warmly in exactly the same words as the servant with 5. It's not a story about outperforming someone else. It's not even really a story about results. These servants were already trusted. They were already given something valuable before they had ever proved anything. The talents are actually an act of trust that preceded any results. Grace puts money in their hands before they ever lift a finger. That's the frame for the whole parable. This isn't a story about earning our way into anything. We're not working to earn our way into our master's good graces. We're already living in the household. We're already loved, trusted. The only question is, what are you going to do with what you've already been given? Over the years, I've been in and around all kinds of churches, and I've met so many people who genuinely had something good to offer, a gift, a story, a skill, a calling. They just didn't use it. And almost every time when you dig down to the real reason underneath their excuses, it's not laziness, it's fear. Fear of messing up, fear that they'll pour everything into something and it still won't be enough, fear of trying and failing in public. What they don't realize is they are the third servant. And every one of those fears is quietly built on this false belief about the character of God. That God is standing over us with a clipboard, filing away our failures as evidence to use against us later. He's not. He's more like a parent standing behind a kid trying to learn how to ride a bike. He's present, he's invested, his hands are just hovering near. He's far more interested in the attempt than the flawless first try. Here's what I want you to walk away holding on to. Nobody in this parable gets in trouble for trying and falling short. There's no fourth servant who invests and loses it all and gets condemned. The only person condemned is the one who does nothing. Burial, not failure. That's the sin this story is warning against. God isn't wanting to punish your imperfect attempt. He's waiting on your attempt. Here's the most stunning thing about the whole parable, and it's easy to miss. The one who is inviting us to take the risk doesn't just demand it from us at a safe distance. He took the risk first. He took the biggest one imaginable. He takes the treasure from heaven, his own son, and entrusts the salvation of the world to a dozen flawed, frightened, frequently missing the point servants. People like you and me. He knew exactly what was going to happen. He knew that the third servant lives in all of us, that we'd be afraid, that we'd try to protect ourselves, that we'd quietly slander his character as an excuse of our own inaction. And he risked it anyway. On the cross, Jesus became the one who was judged in our place. He was stripped of everything, declared worthless by the world standards. He was cast into the outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. He took the judgment reserved for the lazy, wicked servant so that the master could look at us, fear-stricken, prone to bury things and protect ourselves, and give us a new identity instead. Today, you're not an abandoned servant. You're not a barely tolerated servant. You're not even a servant waiting nervously to be caught in a failure. You're a servant who's loved and cared for. You've already been invited into the master's joy. You don't have to audition for it. The first 2 servants in the story weren't trying to earn the master's favor. They invested because of the master's outrageous gift of trust. The master had already proven his favor before the servants did a single thing. Their action is not a response. It's not a resume. It's a grateful thank you lived out loud in the marketplace. That's where our faithfulness comes from as well. Not striving to prove ourselves worthy, but finally believing the truth about the one we serve and telling the world about the truth we believe. So let me ask you plainly, what is it that you've buried in your own life? An opportunity, a gift, a calling, a step of obedience you've been putting off for so long, you've almost convinced yourself it's not there anymore? If you're honest, you probably know exactly where you buried it. And if you dig underneath the "I'm not ready" and the "what if it doesn't work," I think you'll probably discover a belief about God that's not true. This belief that God is harsh, that He's keeping score, that the safest move that you can make is to protect yourself. But here's the truth underneath the entire story. What you believe about God will always show up in what you do with what He's given you. That's actually where the table comes in. The table is proof that the master risked everything first. Before he ever asked his servants to take a step of faith, he already entrusted them with everything that he had. Before he ever asks you to risk anything, he gave you a son. So as we come to the table today, maybe the question isn't only, what have I buried? Maybe the question should be, do I actually believe what he's already proven right here? That he's not a hard master, that he's not keeping score, that his invitation from the very beginning has always been into his joy, not a courtroom. If you've been living small, playing it safe, bearing the very thing that he gave you to use, I think the table is the place where you come to remember the truth about who he actually is. So we can go dig it back up and use whatever he has given us with joy in his kingdom. And so it's my hope this week that as you spend some time thinking about this parable, that you are reminded of the love and the compassion of Jesus Christ, what we are able to experience at the table through the bread and the cup. And as we remember and we dwell on and we think deeply about how much God loves us, that it will move us to go and to love the people that he loves, created in his image, placed in our path, so that we can tell them the good news of Jesus. I hope you have a wonderful week. Never forget how deeply you're loved, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.